Welcome to JK Shah classes for revision lectures on accounting standard for intermediate course as well as IPCC course. Let's start with accounting standard number 17, that is segment reporting. Now, the first of all, why this standard? There is nothing but the objective. What is the requirement? The scope. What do you mean by business segment? And what is a geographical segment? Then some definition. Of course, business segment and all these things also comes under definition only. Definition with respect to what is segment revenue, segment expense and so on. Then 10% criteria and primary segment vis-a-vis secondary segment. This is just nothing but a bird eye view of the whole chapter on segment reporting. These are the things which we are going to understand. Now, coming on to some simple things, like let me go with objective here itself, not going on to jumping to another page. What is the objective of this standard? The first, you want better understanding of the performance. You don't look at the entity as one single entity, but different profit centers working towards overall achievement of the objective, that is wealth maximization. That I want to understand it. What is the performance of that entity? Second, I can in a better way assessment can be done, better assessment of risk and return of the enterprise. Which of a profit center is having high risk? Their business is coming from tobacco as well as their business is also from FMCG items. So tobacco is a huge risk for me. At any point of time, the government may ban it. So this risk assessment is possible. Third area, the returns assessment. Based on the risk, what is the quantum of returns I am getting? And the last, making informed judgment. More informed judgment. Should I continue with my investment or should I dispose of? I can just get an idea with respect to you splitting up your performance. Like at JK Shah classes, I have CS as well as CA. So we can have two segments, a CA segment, CA segment. Of course, we are not going into those nitty-gritties, but within that also I can say it's inter, foundation, final. So these are all areas from where I am getting my revenue as well as where my cost is getting incurred. So I can get better informed decision, not only restricted to the business what I'm doing, but also goes beyond to geographical segments. We have 30 plus branches across India. We are in southern India, in western India, even in eastern India. Our presence is all around. So I want to know, to make informed decision with respect to the profitability, with respect to the performance of each and every branch. So a report is prepared which gives us an idea with respect to the performance. That is nothing but a segment report. As far as scope is concerned, it applies to both SFS as well as CFS. When I say SFS, it is nothing but standalone financial statements. Yeah, you prepare cash flow, balance sheet, income statement and notes forming part of the accounts only for your entity. You say standalone. But when you prepare it for your whole group, holding plus subsidiary plus associate, we say it is nothing but consolidated financial statements. So segment reporting applies to consolidated as well as standalone, or you can also say separate financial statements. But if you're giving your financial statements a standalone as well as consolidated together, then segment reporting need to be given only for consolidated and not for standalone. Okay. Now coming on to the main part, that is nothing but what do you mean by business segment and so on. Let's begin. What is a business segment? So the standard is defined a business segment is a distinguishable component of an enterprise engaged in providing individual product or services or a group of related product or services, and that is subject to risk and returns that are different from those of other business segment. Very long definition, but basic. I'm into FMCG sector. I'm making shampoo also. I'm making soap also. So it may become in segment provided the risk and reward are different from each other, or they may all come under a single umbrella, toiletry products. That is also possible. For that we should identify whether the products are related or not, or they are individual. So a business segment is a distinguishable component of an enterprise which is engaged in providing either individual product or services or group of related product or services that is subject to risk and returns which are different from those other than other business segment. Now whether these are related or not, for that our accounting standard has given some points. If all these points are getting fulfilled, then it is a relatable segment. Majority of the points, whether to identify whether the products and services are related or not. It says nature of products. B, the technology production processes. It is one and the same or not. Production processes. C, class of customer or types of customer. Then methods of distribution. E, regulatory environment. Now what do I mean by all these things? Let me give you an example for this. Like there is a company, a newspaper company, which prints newspaper in English and another local language. Now there are two products, English newspaper, a vernacular or a local language newspaper, say for example Marathi. Now are this Marathi newspaper and English newspapers one and the same? Are they relatable or not relatable? Should they be seen as group of products or it should be seen as different products, individual products? What I wrote here, should it be considered as individual product or related product? So from this we can find out whether it is related. Nature of product, I'll say yes, it's newspaper. If majority of these 5 points are covered, then we say it is nothing but related. Nature of products, yes. Newspaper, yes. Production process, it's same. Class of customer, you may say same. If they are literate, then it is same. If you say no sir, those who come from an English medium background and those who come from another medium background. But for me, it's literate customers. Method of distribution, same channels, and regulatory environment, government regulations are one and the same. So can I say it's nothing but majority of the points are getting covered. It is related products. So a Marathi newspaper and English newspaper, though two different newspaper, two different products, are relatable products, and they will be considered a single segment. Now coming on to geographical segment. Now what do you mean by geographical segment? So a geographical segment is a distinguishable, again, component. Not necessarily it has to be a branch or subsidiary or something like that. It's a component. It may be a division. Anything it may be. It's a component of an enterprise that is engaged in providing products or services, don't say relatable, will also come, products or services within a particular economic environment, and that is subject to risk and return that are different from those of companies operating in other economic environment. Now again a big definition. It's a distinguishable component. What is this component doing? It is engaged in providing what? Goods or services. It is engaged in providing products or services within a particular economic environment. Some particular economic environment, and the risk and return of this particular economic environment where you are giving these goods and services is different from those of those companies which are operating in other economic environment. Then I'll say it is nothing but a geographical segment. I'm selling goods somewhere in US and I'm selling goods somewhere in Africa. So but obvious, there are two different economic environments. So they become a geographical segment because the risk and return in this two environment is different. So now the question arises, what are you talking about? Okay, segment. We have just bifurcated the segment. Either a segment can be a business related segment or it can be based on the economic environment segment, geographical segment I can say. And I have to report whether geographical way or I have to report on a business way. At JKSC either we report on a geographical way based on which branch and whatsoever, or on a business way, CA, CS, 11, 12 and so on. So this is how reporting is to be done. But for that purpose I need to go with some definition with respect to what do you mean by segment revenue, what do you mean by segment expenses, what do you mean by segment assets, segment liabilities and so on. So let's move on to the next part. There is some terms which will be very, very important for us. What do you mean by segment revenue? Now, the first, because then only we will be able to understand it. What is segment revenue? So remember three things. Segment revenue will be nothing but aggregate of directly attributable revenue. Whatever you have earned, that segment has earned directly attributable revenue. Some allocable revenue, of course, which can be allocated on some logical and reasonable basis, and inter-segment revenue So if anybody asks us, what do you mean by segment revenue? Segment revenue consists of three things: directly attributable revenue to that segment, allocable revenue on logical basis, and inter-segment. Between the segment there is some kind of transaction that is referred as inter-segmental revenue. But remember, it does not include, so excludes. What does it exclude? Extraordinary items. If you remember your AS5, What was your extraordinary items? Nothing but any item which does not happen in normal course of our business operation or clearly distinct from it was nothing but our extraordinary items. Interest and dividends. Yeah, so revenue does not include interest and dividend unless the revenue is a financial, unless the segment is a financial segment. So if the segment is a financial segment, then of course this interest and revenue will be directly attributable or allocable on some logical basis. But if it is not a financial segment, then interest and dividend will not be included. Similarly, one more thing is not included, and that is nothing but gains. There is nothing but profit made, gains on sale of investment or extinguishment of a liability. Of course, remember this point, very much important. These two things not applicable for a financial segment. In case of a bank or an investment company. So this is nothing but my segment revenue. Then comes, what do you mean by second area? Segment expense. What do you mean by segment expense? Again, same. A, directly attributable expense. मतलब वही segment के लिए कोई खर्चा हुआ है, directly attributable. We have done the expense exclusively for that segment, salary to that employees, some benefits, electricity cost to that something. Second, allocable expenses. On some basis you can allocate the expense, like a manager is working in both the segments, so you can allocate it on logical basis, that is number of hours the manager has worked. And of course the same thing which you had there, intersegmental, because what is revenue for you, it's obviously an expense for the other person, intersegmental, but it excludes. See, what does it excludes? Same what it was there, extraordinary items, B, interest and dividend. Of course dividend in any case doesn't come, but I'll just use the word, but better is interest expense, provided it is not financial in nature. And the third area which was there, what was there in case of segment revenue? Gains on sale of investments or extinguish of liabilities. Same way, instead of gains, can I say loss on sale of investment or extinguishment of liability? Of course these two things, again the same thing what I have written here, not applicable for a financial segment. One more, income tax expense will not be there. Even general admin or overhead expenses, general admin, selling and distribution, and all this expense will also not form part of my segment expense. So segment expense, three things are included: attributable, allocable, and intersegment expenses. What is not included? These are the five things, same three things which we had here. Same three things which we had here. Same three things: extra, income tax, and general expenses. Now comes the next area. What do you mean by segment result? Can I say segment result? Nothing but your profit. Segment result is nothing but segment revenue minus segment expense. Excess of segment revenue over segment expense is nothing but segment result. Then I can have segment assets. What do you mean by segment assets? What will come under segment assets? Now So what are segment assets? Segment assets are nothing but those operating assets which can be directly attributable or they can be allocated on some reasonable basis. One more point you should remember is if interest or dividend is getting included in your segment revenue, then the asset pertaining to that will be included in your segment assets. Of course, what should be excluded, what should not form, the exclusion here is very much important. Income tax asset. Income tax assets do not form part of your segment assets, like any deferred taxes or any kind of advance tax paid. All these are income tax asset. Coming on to the fifth area, segment liabilities. What do you mean by segment liabilities? Segment liabilities are nothing but those operating liabilities. The same thing. I'll just use liabilities which are directly attributable or can be allocated on reasonable basis. Again, the point to remember here is it excludes income tax liabilities. See, segment expense also included income tax expense. So income tax liabilities or general liabilities. Now what can be your general liabilities? There is nothing but a loan taken which is generalized in nature, cannot be earmarked on any of these segments. So this is nothing but all about segment assets, segment results, segment expense, segment revenue. Yeah, some 5 areas. This is to be discussed because presentation is to be done for them. Segment revenue, segment expense, segment results, segment asset, and segment liabilities. Now coming on to the point which we were discussing here, for this we just completed here all these points. Now which segment are to be reported? Which segment to be reported? I may be having thousands of segments. Should I give information for all these 1,000 segments? That is the question. Should all segments be reported? But obvious answer is no. For that, the standard has given some criteria which is referred as 10% threshold criteria. Let's talk about 10% threshold criteria. So I can just use something like identifiable reportable segments. We have to identify reportable segments. Now, the first, if the segment revenue from sales to customer, or I can say external customer as well as intersegmental revenue. Oh, I'll just make it in a better way, I think much better. I'll just say if the segment revenue, I'll not do bifurcation because if you remember segment revenue, 3 things were there: directly attributable, allocable, and intersegmental revenue. So I'm not writing it again. If the segment revenue, I'll just also remove from also, is 10% or more of the total revenue, then that segment will be reportable. If the segment revenue is 10% or more of the total revenue, then that segment is reportable. Same way, if the segment assets are 10%, if you remember segment assets, operating assets, again, operating assets directly attributable, allocable, or income tax assets are not to be considered. directly attributable, allocable, and the third was nothing but if interest and finance is interest income or dividend income is added to your segment revenue, then that particular asset will also be included. But income tax assets not there. If segment assets are 10% or more of the total assets of all segments, of course, then you are reportable. Means either you fulfill criteria 1 or you fulfill criteria 2. The third criteria, very important criteria, if the segment result, very much important, if the segment result, of course it may be a profit or it may be loss, is 10% or more of number 1, the combined result of all segments in profit, or the combined result of all segments in loss, of course whichever is higher in absolute terms. So what I have to do, say for example I have segment A, B, C, D, E, F, and so many. Say these 3 segments are in profit and these 3 segments are in loss. So what I have to do is, I have to find out what is the total of these 3 segments which are in profits. Say that amount is 100, and this 3 segments which are in loss, their amount is 80. I will choose 100. 100 into 10%, so 10. Now whichever segment is in 10, it may be this negative 15 is there, negative 40 is there, whatsoever it may be, this 2 will be reportable because it is 10. So that is nothing but in absolute terms. That is very much important. D, management discretion. If the management feels that they would like to report some segments, then they can report it on their own. It is management discretion also. Coming on to E. If the segment was reported in the previous year because it fulfilled 10% criteria, then it is to be reported even in the current year, though it may not fulfill the reportable criteria. Means in the last year एक segment था whose segment asset was more than 10% and it was getting reported. In the current year the same segment does not fulfill the criteria, neither revenue का 10% nor profit or loss in combined form का 10% nor asset का 10%. So it is not getting reported. But what does the standard say? It says if this segment was reported in the previous year, then it will be reported in the current year also. But in previous year it was reported based on 10% criteria, then only it will be reported here. Otherwise it will not be reported. It was reported because of management discretion, then it will not be reported. But if it was fulfilling 10% criteria in the previous year, then it has to be reported in the current year. And the last and very important, after identifying all the segments based on this. All the segments are covered, A, B, C, D, E. After having every segment based on this, now I feel that the total segment revenue which is getting reported from sales to external customer is less than 75% of the enterprise revenue. What is enterprise revenue? The revenue which will be shown in your actual profit and loss account, that is nothing but your enterprise revenue. So what does the standard talk here is, the standard says after all of the above reportable segments are considered, compare segment revenue from the above segment. Of course, segment revenue I'll just take all these things here, please. Chalega. I just continue this. No. After all the above reportable segments are considered, compare segment revenue from revenue from external customers if the same is less than 75% of the enterprise revenue. We need to add some more segments. See, once point number A to E, we got all the segments. जो भी segment आता रहेगा, what we have to do, just ignore this part. What we have to do, once A to E segments have been identified, what we have to do is compare the segment revenue from revenue, compare segment revenue from external customers with enterprise revenue. It will be compared with enterprise revenue. If the same is less than 75%, if the segment revenue from sales to external customer is less than 75% of the enterprise revenue, then what? Additional segments have to be included. More segments have to be included till we reach 75%. More and more segments have to be included. Yeah. So we completed 10% threshold criteria also. 10% criteria is over. Now this I can just speak up in a normal way. Primary segment and a secondary segment. This is with reference to what? This is with reference to the reporting way. The reporting requirement for a primary segment is different and secondary segment is different by AS 17. A business segment can be a primary segment or a geographical segment can be a primary segment. If business is a primary segment, then geographical is a secondary segment. If geographical segment is a primary segment, then business is a secondary segment. Now how to identify who is primary, who is secondary? It is very simple. From where are my underlying risk coming? If the underlying risk are coming from businesses, then business segment becomes my primary segment. But if my underlying risk are coming from a geographical location, then geographical segment is a primary segment, and that decides our disclosures. Primary segment disclosures are different from secondary segment. Now, let's proceed further for questions and answers on segment reporting. So Chief Accountant of the Sports Limited gives you the following data regarding its 6 segments: M, N, O, P, Q, R. M, segment assets 80, 30, 20, 20, 10, 200, segment results and segment revenue. Chief Accountant is of the opinion that segment M and N alone should be reported. Easy, justified in his view. Discuss. Now, this is nothing but our module question only. So let's discuss it. This is threshold criteria. If the segment revenue is 10% or more than your total segment revenue, then it is reportable. If you look properly, this is 200. 10% is nothing but 20. So can I say 20? Yes, reportable, 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 reportable. So as per this only, segment assets, I'm sorry, if your segment assets are 10% of your total asset, it is reportable. So MNOPQ, they are all satisfying the asset criteria of 10%. Coming on to revenue criteria, 1200, it means I need to be 120. Who is fulfilling? 120, 120 here, no, 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 no. Means can I say only M and N are fulfilling this criteria because it is 120. Now segment results. Now when I go with segment results, I should only take the segments in losses and segments in profit separately. So 190 plus 10. So the loss segment is 200, 50 plus 10, 60, 70, 70 and 30, 100. So profit 100, loss 200, whichever is higher. So obviously 200. So the amount will be 10%, 20. Who fulfills 20 criteria? 1, 2, no, no, no. So 10 does not fulfill, 10 does not fulfill, 10 does not, 30 fulfills. So if you look properly, can I say all the segments are reportable? All the segments are getting reported. Yeah. Even R is getting reported based on the threshold criteria of profits. So here is the solution for you. So it is revenue from sales to customers based on the revenue and based on the assets. On the turnover criteria, M and N are reportable. If you look properly, turnover criteria, M and N got reported. On the basis of result criteria, M and N are reportable. Results, M, N and R got reported. Okay, this is what we take. And based on asset criteria, all segment except R, asset criteria, M, N, O, P, Q. I hope you remember the tick which we made. So practically all segments are getting reported. Okay, the last question, same. Microtech Limited produces batteries for scooters, cars, trucks, specialized batteries for, this is not investors, I'm sorry, it is inverters. The inverters which we have, and UPS. How many segments should it have? Can I say as far as scooter, car, truck is concerned, they will have risk and reward with respect to that only. And inverters and UPS will have the same combination. In case of the basic product is batteries, but the risk and returns of batteries for automobiles, that is scooter, car and truck, and batteries for inverters and UPS are affected by different set of factors. In case of automobile battery, the risks are affected by government policy, roads, conditions, quality of automobile, whereas in case of batteries for inverters and UPS, the risk and returns are affected by power conditions, standard of living. Therefore, it can say Microtech can have two business segments, automobile batteries and batteries for inverters. Yeah, a very simple same question we have taken from our module only. Okay, let's end AS 17.